Hello, everyone. It's your host, your friend, your boy, Jet Black, the one and only, here with
hmm
Ryan. And today we are going to be doing episode 11 of the Two Guys Talking podcast, the podcast where Ryan and I talk on the phone about whatever. So, a moment ago, Ryan was telling me that Alan Moore was in an interview where he was talking about comic book films. And he noted that he hadn't seen a comic book film since Tim Burton's Batman film, which I believe was released back in like 1989. When I mentioned to Ryan that we should talk about it on the podcast, he was like, "But we're not going to talk about it on the podcast." And I'm like, "What do you mean we're not going to talk about it on the podcast?" So I guess now I just want to ask Ryan, would you like to continue our conversation that we had before about Tim Burton? Or are we just gonna like drop the topic and let people, I guess, look it up themselves?
No.
So that's Ryan saying, no, we're not gonna talk about the Alan Moore thing. Right? Because the no is very vague. I can go either way.
hmm
Okay. We are gonna talk about the Alan Moore thing. Okay. So Ryan, tell me more about like what Alan Moore was saying about superhero movies.
I didn't read the interview.
You didn't read the interview?
hmm
What was the headline of the interview?
mm
You don't know? How did you learn about the interview that you didn't read?
It was trending on Twitter, and I was reading excerpts that people screenshotted of the interview.
Okay. Based on the excerpts that people screenshotted from the interview, uh, what are some interesting tidbits from the interview?
Doesn't seem like he likes superhero movies.
Does he disclose why he doesn't like superhero movies?
Yeah.
Okay. Why doesn't Alan Moore like superhero movies based on the excerpts from the interview that you read?
Okay. Here, how about I read off this quote from Alan Moore? This is the only bit that I've read from the
Okay.
interview. Most people equate comics with superhero movies now. That adds another layer of difficulty for me. I haven't seen a superhero movie since the first Tim Burton Batman film. They have blighted cinema and also blighted culture to a degree. Several years ago, I said I thought it was a really worrying sign that hundreds of thousands of adults were queuing up to see characters that were created 50 years ago to entertain 12-year-old boys. They seem to speak to some kind of longing to escape from the complexities, or that seemed to speak to some kind of longing to escape from the complexities of the modern world and go back to a nostalgic, remembered childhood that seemed dangerous. It was infantilizing the population. This may be entirely coincidence, but in 2016, when the American people elected a National Socialist Satsuma and the UK voted to leave the European Union, six of the top 12 highest grossing films were superhero movies. Not to say that one causes the other, but I think they're both symptoms of the same thing, a denial of reality and an urge for simplistic and sensational solutions.
I
End quote.
I don't follow his logic very well. Because he talks about how like it could be a coincidence that those two things happen. Which I'm glad that that's something that he acknowledges because it just sounds like a coincidence, I would argue. He's talking about the idea that like people go for superhero movies because there's like this familiar nostalgic to it, like familiar nostalgia to it. But he's coming from a perspective of someone who hasn't watched modern superhero films, which deviate from the original source material and try to modernize a lot of these characters that he says are from the 50s, which I think is interesting because a good few comic characters, at least from DC,
They were
really like predate
50s.
that period. I'm sorry?
He didn't say from 50 years ago.
Oh, from 50 years ago, not from the 50s. That still
Hmm.
seems weird because a lot of these characters are more than 50 years old still. But whatever. Like, I get what he's saying. All these older characters. But comics, especially, well, especially superhero comics, have to do with, like, trying to modernize these characters as they develop. They continually grow and change and evolve in order to hold the attention of audiences. Because comics that don't do that normally end up finding themselves within like niche audiences or just dying out. So the culture is something that like continually develops. The people who are in love with the superhero movie interpretations of these popular characters aren't living out this like nostalgic daydream of the characters in their original interpretation as they were written for like smaller children. They're seeing these characters who have been made to be more appealing for older audiences. And I feel like his perspective being based on having seen a movie from like 1989 and that was like the last superhero movie he's like ever seen like may be skewed because Tim Burton Batman is like a weird combination of like somewhat campy with but with like darker like Tim Burton tones.
You want me to read the next paragraph?
The next paragraph? Sure.
Here, I'll read them. When asked by Deadline if he had any interest in watching contemporary superhero films, Moore responded, "Oh, great, no, I don't watch any of them. All of these characters have been stolen from their original of them. They have a long line of
Oh, hold on.
ghosts
You
standing
got
behind
cut
them."
out.
No,
So part of the quote got lost. You said stolen from the original, and then there was like a gap.
all of these creators have been stolen from their original create. All of these characters have been stolen from their original creators. All of them. They have a long line of ghosts standing behind them. I have no interest in superheroes. They were a thing that was invented in the late 1930s for children. They were perfectly good as children's entertainment. If you try to make them for the adult world, then I think it becomes kind of grotesque.
Okay. Like it's
And well,
interesting. Oh, thank you. So he says when you try to make them for the adult world, it becomes kind of grotesque. But he also is the guy who made Watchmen, which I feel like is almost like a statement about that. And it's praised for being like really good. And I feel like he almost like is part of the reason why superheroes have continued to try to modernize and appeal to older audiences and to try and like tell a superhero story that is like more adult. I guess is interesting. Like I would kind of be curious like why did he make Watchmen if he's like I don't care for superheroes and I don't think superheroes should be made for like an adult audience because Watchmen definitely isn't made for kids. Like, is his argument that like not all the stories should be like Watchmen? Also,
okay. So they ask a question.
okay,
Deadline asks, "You said you feel responsible for how comics have changed. Why?" Moore says, "It was largely my work that attracted an adult audience. It was the way that was commercialized by the comics industry. There were tons of headlines saying that comics had grown up. But other than a couple of particular individual comics, they really hadn't. This thing happened with graphic novels in the 1980s. People wanted to carry on reading comics as they always had. And they could now do it in public and still feel sophisticated because they weren't reading a children's comic. It wasn't seen as subnormal. You didn't get the huge advances in adult comic books that I was thinking we might have, as witnessed by the endless superhero films."
whoa, oh wait, hold up.
End quote.
There we go. Okay. So again, I think it's weird that he says as witnessed by like the endless superhero films. For one, I don't know what audience Alan Moore thinks superhero movies are for now. Because they are like a mixed affair. they're not like just for adults. They're definitely also there to like market toys and bring in kids and get kids to like jump on the hype train of these characters so that they like watch the cartoon and dresses them as Halloween and all this other shit. Um, so I think it's weird for him to act like the movies are like mainly trying to appeal to adults or something like that. Like superheroes are still a thing that kids too can also enjoy. The concept of like the 80s boom of like darker comics which helped to usher in like the dark age, it's interesting for him to bring that up because it sounds similar to what I was saying before about how like, well, you kind of are a part of the reason why they got darker and everything like that.
He does mention, or he's talking about something called The Show, which is some sort of new project. Like, I think that's the impetus for the interview.
Like he's trying to promote something that like he
Attempting to break into the film business on his own terms with original project of The Show. Like, The Show is like the title or something.
right.
Um,
Okay. While you're looking into that a little bit more, I'm going to continue on like the commentary.
yeah.
So I feel like it's interesting that he says that like comics are being held back by like superheroes. Like it's almost like he's trying to argue that like until comics move beyond superheroes that you can't necessarily have them like evolve, like they're like trapped in like a specific genre. I would disagree, to be honest. Comics over time have evolved a lot. Originally, we had like pulp magazines, and pulp magazines ended up developing into stuff like detective comics and like westerns and romance comics and horror comics and stuff like that. But superheroes became just like the giant, the like most popular form of like comic book story. And until that boat gets rocked, until someone comes out with like the next big awesome like non superhero comic that just blows the other superhero comics out of the water, then that's just kind of going to be like the status quo. But the status quo has changed multiple times throughout the years. There have been periods where superheroes have fallen off and stuff like westerns have like taken off. So like we're not necessarily stuck in a world where we're only ever going to have superhero comics and they're never going to change. And even in the modern day, we have plenty of like indie publishers who are making like non superhero comics. It's just not necessarily like the main thing. Like it's not necessarily like the mainstream thing you think about when you think about comics being like some non superhero book. But there are plenty of great non superhero comics. Um, Alan Moore talking about like how superhero movies are promoting like this weird change in society and how we need to like move away from it. I missed the last thing you said.
It seems weird because what I was doing was kind of like I guess quote mining some of it. Looking at the full interview, I think I missed some of the lead in that he was saying to some of those quotes. Not that it would really help. I think your like extrapolation, I guess, of what he's saying, but
Does it like change the like meaning of what he's saying with the additional context?
he just talks a bit more like before and after on a couple of the questions.
I mean, that makes sense that an excerpt that was caught in the middle would have things before and after it that also are like related. So that's not surprising. Does he say anything in particular that would like either further like enhances his stance or maybe suggests that like he had a different meaning behind what he said than what has been inferred? Or is it more of the same, more or less? I'm essentially asking if, like, what he said before or after is adding to what he said, or if it's just, like, reinforcing what he said, but without saying, like, new points necessarily. I imagine the pause comes from you looking at the article. Feel free to, like, hop in, like, if you do have, like, an answer to that at a certain point. Um, so I feel like it's kind of weird what Alan Moore is saying, because he's saying it from a position of someone who's like not looking at the material. Because he's saying that like superhero movies are making it where, well, he's trying to attribute the popularity of superhero movies to people like pushing for nostalgia and
No,
adults clamoring for like children content.
I mean, a little bit of that last bit you said that they're too escapist.
That they're too escapist. He's
Yeah.
like, people should be after more grounded stories, seems to be like his argument. But I guess one thing that I'd be curious about is like, why does he feel like that's how people should be? Like, why is he so against people just enjoying the media that they enjoy? It almost feels like a fun police kind of thing, where he's like, why do people like this? And it's weird that people like it, but you can just kind of like whatever you like, you know? And he seems to be attributing it to be like, and this is why, like, political stuff is weird because people are so like escapist.
No, you seem to be extrapolating it weirdly.
Well, go back to the
You want me to just send you
relates
the
it to
interview
the.
and you read it, and then we talk about it later or something?
Well, hold on, because I'm going off of like the quote that you provided, where he talks about how it might be a coincidence that like during the 2016
Maybe you don't quite
also
get the kind of like palingenetic nostalgia attributed, or like it's a part of like fascism.
does he say that? Does he say that like it's it's fascist that people like superhero movies? Like I don't
No,
know.
that's not what he's saying. That's not what I'm saying. Like I don't know what you.
What
You're
are
like
like? Why did you
constructing
say that
really
it's like a
quickly.
part of fashion? Because now it sounds like is that what he's arguing? Because I don't know
No,
why you brought it up if it's not what he's arguing.
God.
What?
I don't know where you're getting this like weird shit that you're saying from.
What do you mean?
Like it's not in the quote, and it's not what I just said. So you're getting like because he specifically wasn't drawing like a one-to-one causal link to this stuff.
Well, he says like it may be a coincidence that these two things happen around the same time, but he's not saying that as a way of saying and therefore they are completely unrelated. He's essentially saying there could be some correlation. There's no reason to bring up the coincidence if you're not trying to point out that they could be correlated. Because then what's the point of saying it, right? Like, what's the point of bringing it up? If not to try and draw a connection.
So he is.
So he is drawing. So he is drawing a connection. What do you think is the like correlation that he's trying to say may or may not be there? By saying that in the same year, 2016, with the election stuff and with Brexit, being like the same year that like all these superhero movies are like the number one movie. Like, what do you think he is trying to say with that statement?
Okay, so a bunch of the superhero movies are this kind of like nostalgic escapism, right?
I am not entirely sure if the nostalgic element is as big of a part of it as you might think. really depends on the audience. A lot of people are introduced to a lot of superhero stuff through the superhero movies. So the nostalgic element to me really depends on if you were into superheroes at all prior to the movies. Some people only fuck with the movies and they only know about the movie stuff. So from that point of view, it has nothing to do with nostalgia. You could say it's an escapist thing. You can't necessarily say it's nostalgic if the vast majority of people looking at it don't have like a past reference point who didn't read the comics or watch the shows or anything.
Let me have the paragraph where he says, before he says that other stuff. Okay. So Deadline asks, you retired from comics after finishing the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen in 2018. Any thought on getting back in this saddle? More. I'm not so interested in comics anymore. I don't want anything to do with them. I've been doing comics for 40 something years when I finally retired. When I entered the comics industry, the big attraction was that it was a medium that was vulgar. It had been created to entertain working class people, particularly children. The way that the industry has changed, it's graphic novels now. It's entirely priced for an audience of middle class people. I have nothing against middle class people, but it wasn't meant to be a medium for middle aged hobbyists. It was meant to be a medium for people who haven't got much money. Then he has the two paragraphs of the superhero movie thing.
So, in reaction to the.
So you're talking about like a shift from comics being for like poor children to like middle-aged hobbyists. And those are the people who have a dangerous nostalgia.
You don't necessarily have. Because the thing about like that quote versus the second quote, the second quote that's talking about like the 2016 in the movie thing is specifically talking about like the movies.
It's like 3 paragraphs.
I missed part of what you said. I heard you say 3 paragraphs.
It's all part of the same response to that question in 3 paragraphs.
It seems like the first part that you went back and read is talking more about comics. But the second part where he talks about like 2016 and the top movies and everything, that there's like a separation. He goes from like talking about comic books and who he feels the medium was originally for what like now graphic novels are more for like the middle class, to him talking about like
middle class, like
nostalgia.
Old, like middle-aged middle class people.
Right. I feel like there is a separation because not everyone who's like piling into these theaters is nostalgic for like any of the comics necessarily. A lot of the like mainstream public who's going to go see superhero movies, it's either like their first exposure to these characters or it's their like main exposure to the characters, where there isn't more nostalgia though.
He's not talking about those people.
But then how is there like a big thing to pull from it if he's not like if he's talking about the niche group of people who were into the comics and graphic novels and everything anyways, who would have seen the movie regardless, right? Like if he's talking about like fans, how much of the population do we think is made up of people who are like really into the characters already, who then are going to see the movies? And how can you correlate that to something like the 2016 election and like political stuff? How much political power does that small niche have? How big does
it's not just that niche, it reflects larger patterns of dangerous nostalgia.
But it seems like it's a weird thing to draw a connection to. If the group that he's using as an example is like so small, why use that one as the example? And why would you try to correlate it to like a much bigger political thing?
It's just like a particular example that he's familiar with in like a larger context of political stuff.
And how is the comic book thing dangerous nostalgia. Like the fans who are like, I like the graphic novels that are written more to appeal to like an adult audience. What's dangerous about like taking stories that might have originally been made for like younger children and then modernizing them for adult audiences? I mean, modernize is weird because you don't have to like shift time period or anything to make it like appeal to an adult necessarily. But I don't know
It's
the
not about the
more
content of the
mature, I
movie.
guess.
It's about like the text. Okay, so the quote is that seemed to speak to some kind of longing to escape from the complexities of the modern world and to go back to a nostalgic, remembered childhood. That seemed dangerous. It was infantilizing the population.
I don't understand how it's infantilizing the population. You can watch like a movie or read a
It's
book.
not the movie, it's people using the movie as like escapism to ignore the modern world.
But that's like a mutually exclusive thing. You can watch the movie,
Ignoring the modern world by escaping into movies is a dangerous infantilizing of the population.
but you can watch the
They can do it
movie,
for other movies and other literature, like he says.
right? But you can still watch any movie or read any book and still also care about the world around you. It's not like buying
Right. But he's
a
saying
book or
that
watching a movie.
ignoring the world around you is dangerous.
But it sounds like he's specifically trying to say that like superhero movies and stuff are like a big like like the media can exist and people can enjoy the media and the media be successful without that meaning that people are ignoring the bigger problems of the world. You can go to the movie and say I like the movie, and then you can still go home and be like stuff's wrong with the world, I should do stuff about the world. Like you can do both things. It's because it's weird, I guess is what I'm saying. You can't necessarily like guarantee that everyone who's like really into the films is ignoring the greater problems of the world. Nor am I necessarily saying that that's what he's saying, but I guess I don't understand the connection. If it wasn't superhero movies and it was like romance movies or like the top movies of 2016, would he be saying the same thing but like people are escaping into romance? Or if it was like westerns or sci-fi or whatever, like what's the point of like pointing out the superhero thing and saying that people are like trying to escape into superhero movies? What if superhero movies are doing really well, Alan Moore? Because the special effects are like better than they have been in the last like 20 years, and you can have these like crazy spectacles on screen that you couldn't see back in like 1989, which is like the last time
There's a lot of
a superhero movie.
so it maybe it won't connect well, but it reminds me of how like George Lucas describes and like the creation of Star Wars, right? So George Lucas creates Star Wars as like a children's movie to teach children about good and evil, right? Like look at all this good stuff and like evil stuff and see how like the difference is children. And then people like in the 70s and 80s associated themselves with the good guys when like the empire was the United States like imperialism. Like we're the bad guys in Star Wars, like the US, right? But people like associated themselves with the rebels instead. And so they really kind of like screwed up watching Star Wars.
Well, it's interesting because if you want to put the audience in the shoes of the bad guy, I think that might be like a more interesting way to get it across. Because when you're watching a movie and you're following a protagonist, and the protagonist is a good guy, you normally do try to like connect yourself to the protagonist and relate to the protagonist and try and like find yourself in them. Like I feel like a lot of times after you watch a movie, you might be like, wow, I like can kind of see like myself in the character in some way. And I feel like if you have a flawed protagonist, if you have a protagonist who like is a bad guy, it might be easier for people to see, hey, like I may have certain like things in my life that I could be doing better and that are like flawed. But I don't think a lot of people try to relate super heavily to the antagonist necessarily. It really depends on how you structure your story, how much you really know about the antagonist for you to attach yourself to, if there's like enough there for you to relate to the bad guy. So I feel like maybe what would have helped Star Wars in that case is if you followed a bad guy through the movie. Because then as you're watching the bad guy, you could see a little bit of yourself in the bad guy,
Not about
recognize things that you could maybe do better about your life and like change and stuff. You know?
it's not about an atomization and the personal relationship with the characters. It's about like reflecting on the group society of the empire.
I guess what I'm trying to say is that like a main character, like a protagonist, is like the audience's like window to a world.
So take a look at Alan Moore, right? So Alan Moore creates guys like Rorschach, who are like smelly losers and are like a negative example of a person to be. Like, don't be like Rorschach. He's a smelly loser who sucks, is how Alan Moore was trying to create the character, according to Alan Moore. And then like people come up to him, they're like, "Yo, I really like identified with Rorschach, and like I'm really like into him." And Alan Moore's like, "Stay away from me."
I do see where you're coming.
You identify with Rorschach.
It does sound like a
Like, people will like take these like political kind of like undertone or overtones really, and like these kind of like political art, and they'll like get really weird um interpretations of it, as if like these bad guys are actually good or something. Or if the good guys are fighting against the bad guys, obviously we would be like the good guys fighting against the bad guy. We're not the bad guys, right? Right? And then like Alan Moore and George Lucas are like, no, no, you are the bad guys. Yeah. America's the bad guys. And Americans don't like that.
I would say that that has a lot to say about like the people watching the movie because
Right?
that's I feel like Rorschach is like a good example of trying to put the audience in the shoes of the bad guy, but then the audience being like, "But he's cool, right?" Um, I feel like it depends on who you give the material to. Then, just whether or not they would go, "Oh, like this is bad and this isn't something that I should be," or "Oh, this represents."
Right. And so it's not about like the
Kind of
age,
thing.
like the children, it can like wash over them to an extent. But you have like these like adults coming in identifying with Rorschach, which is dangerous.
But that's not as much an issue with the material as it again is with
Right.
the
Because Alan Moore's not quite talking about the material. He's like half as much talking about the people watching the superhero movies. It's a blight on the culture.
but
On
it
like
seems like a connected argument though. Like it sounds like when you ask Alan Moore,
he was
would
worried
you
about
watch
the hundreds of thousands of adults queuing up to watch the movie.
but it sounds like you have like a chance of adults watching the movie and properly identify air quotes
So there's a
properly
bit where
identifying a message.
him, um, what was it? Was it about like movies? Okay, so this is where he's talking about the. Okay, So they say, Ted and last, do you watch no superhero movies at all? What about something a bit offbeat, like Joker? You wrote a key Batman comic book. Moore says, oh Christ, no, I don't watch any of them. All these characters have been stolen from their original creators, all of them. They have a long line of ghosts standing behind them. In the case of Marvel films, Jack Kirby. I have no interest in superheroes. They were a thing that was invented in the late 1930s for children. They were perfectly good as children's entertainment, but if you try to make them for the adult world, I think it becomes kind of grotesque. I've been told the Joker film wouldn't exist without my Joker story. But 3 months after I had written that, I was disowning it. It was far too violent. It was Batman, for Christ's sake. It was a guy dressed up as a bat. Increasingly, I think the best version of Batman was Adam West, which didn't take it at all seriously. We have a kind of superhero character in the show, but if we get the chance to develop them more, then people will be able to see all of them. All of the characters have quite unusual aspects to them.
It sounds like Alan Moore wants comics to stay very like surface level
I don't think he
or
wants to.
superheroes specifically. Like it sounds like he's like for superheroes there's like a limit. You get to like where you start trying to take them seriously and he's like you miss the point. It sounds like he wants comics to evolve
No, but that's just what
superhero
comics
genre.
started out as, and it's not because like evolve into what?
Well, again, I feel like I get confused when you
It
get
sounds more like
confused. A
he
lot of my
didn't
stuff is
see them
reacting off of the
opportunity
quotes that you're saying.
to evolve into anything. That yeah, they should stay the children's campy thing because that's what they were meant to be, and trying to make them like adult and edgy is, as he's saying, grotesque.
Look back at like another point in the article that you quoted where he talked about how he thought comics would have evolved more, but since they've stuck with superheroes, they haven't. Like you read a quote that more or less had
Yeah, I remember that bit.
right. That's what I'm referring to. It sounds like he's like for superheroes, he's like it should like stop at the campy stuff. He's like it's fine to write the campy children stuff,
Superhero comic.
but that comics, if they want to continue and talk about more adult themes, it sounds like he wants them to be more grounded and move away from the superhero genre. Like that sounds
You
like
think
the
that
argument that
most
he's
people
making.
equate comics with superhero movies now. That like yeah, like a bunch of comics are viewed through the lens of comic book superheroes, sort of thing.
But again,
You can argue
I
that that's not the case. All kinds of like successful comics that aren't like that, like The Walking Dead or something.
yeah, I already mentioned that earlier that there are plenty of indie comics that aren't superhero based. But what I would say is that I don't agree with Alan Moore's stance on like superhero comics and the idea that like superhero comics should stay just like a kid's media. For example, Ryan, do you like Savage Dragon?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and Savage Dragon is a superhero comic that's definitely not written for kids. It's not meant for kids to read at all. But it's a good story. It's something that's like continually like developed and evolved over time. It talks about a lot of like real world stuff within like a superhero context. And I imagine someone could probably read Savage Dragon and somehow misconstrue messages or concepts in the same way that anyone could really read anything and misconstrue the meaning of the thing or have some weird interpretation of it. But that doesn't make the medium itself somehow bad. I think it's very interesting that Alan Moore is saying, like, I don't like how comics have changed, and he's like, I want comics to be different. But comics kind of reflect like the market. They reflect what people are like willing to purchase, you know? And I feel like Alan Moore feels that way and that's fine. And it makes sense for him not to like put money into helping support those things be continued. It makes sense why he wouldn't watch the superhero movies that then would promote a company to be like, well, we need to keep popularizing these characters and making more stories about them. Like I feel like all his actions make sense. I just find it odd because it's more or less him saying, well, they used to be like this, and I wish they'd be like how they used to be, or I wish they'd just be really different. It's just a strong like
It's
opinion,
not,
and that's
I feel
fine.
like you keep saying he wishes. I don't think he wishes that they were different. I think
Well,
he's calling them like gross and bad, but he
if you
doesn't like wish they were different.
but
I
it,
get.
there are multiple statements that indicate that he would rather them be different. Him talking about how superhero comics work fine as children's material. I imagine if all the superhero stuff was just made for kids, Alan Moore would be like, "This is fine." This like he'd be totally fine with it. And if there was a sudden switch where all the superhero stuff was now like kid based and was pushed toward kids, I think Alan Moore would be like, "Yeah, as it should be." Like I don't think he would be upset by that, and I think that would be something that he would like to see. He would like to see that change. And then when it comes to like comics in general and their continual development, again, he made a quote where he specifically was like, I thought they would have developed more, and he feels like they would if they moved past the superhero genre. It seems like he's like they'll develop more if they like are telling more of these like grounded, less escapist stories. Because like you said, he's making an argument for how he's like these escapist stories aren't necessarily like good for society. I again am just saying that I personally disagree with that because it's a thing
He
where
doesn't say, but do you want me to like re-say the because he's talking about they didn't develop as like an adult comic book thing, and like a bunch of the movies are still in this weird kid uh kidified version of how like things play out. Like he's talking about in the last sentence of the thing after the Nazi thing. He says, not to say that one causes the other, but I think they're both symptoms of the same thing, a denial of reality and an urge for simplistic and sensational solutions. So you have like the superhero movies where like Superman defeats the bad guy by punching him in the face and movie over. There's stuff like that. But that's not how the world works.
that still to me feels like a kind of gatekeeping thing for the kinds of stories that like should be told. It just feels like a really strongly held opinion that again I'm just saying I don't
Okay.
personally
So
agree with.
like comic book heroes and thus comic books as like an industry haven't grown up since like the days of like campy Batman, and that just like campy Batman, like Adam West was the best because it didn't try to take itself seriously with its same shit. Like it's you're at like the same like level of maturity and development as you were in like 60s Batman, but 60s Batman isn't trying to hide that lack of maturity with like edgy, stuff that you'd find in like the Savage Dragon. The Savage Dragon, he's still just punching people in the face to solve his problem.
There's a mix
Hasn't developed past
Savage Dragon.
that.
Because sometimes Savage Dragon does just beat people by punching them in the face. Like it's not like a every adventure is solved through like talking out your problems kind of thing.
To reality.
So I disagree with the concept that like Adam West was the like thing.
That's like an example of it recognizing that it's like silly and dumb.
I feel like there's like a blend of like the silly and dumb with like the more serious stuff. And I think that's okay. Like I feel like there's a difference between reading a comic where like in the comic people aren't like haha Batman looks stupid
No, it's like
like a bat.
people are like reading stuff like the Savage Dragon as if it's like some kind of like profound thing where it's just like fundamentally it's still at the level of I punch a guy in the face. Kind of like absurd nonsense.
But it's weird that Alan Moore is like, because the way that you're arguing right now about like Alan Moore's point is like to say that like truly there is nothing profound in anything superhero based and that it's all really campy but it takes itself too seriously. I disagree. You can just have like good like moral moments and like these crazy like superhero stories. You can have like legitimate character development. You
Like
can
what
tell like these like
he says is about like that the thing of the 80s was people wanting to continue to read comics and still feel sophisticated about reading like it's like reading like going to like the children's section of like a bookstore, where you have like kiddie books and like reading those and still wanting to feel sophisticated about reading kiddie books. That a lot of these comic books are still at that kiddie book level, but like you don't get laughed out the room for like reading Batman at that kitty level.
it's weird.
That like comic books haven't moved past that kitty level shit, but like, and so neither have like the audiences that read that.
How are you defining like kiddie level? There's absurd shit in comic books for sure, but there's also absurd shit in a lot of like different fictional genres. Like science fiction stuff that goes like really off the wall to where it's like practically magic or just literal
Right?
magic stuff and like medieval fantasy.
The fictional setting of the books. It's talking about like the maturity of like the solutions that the books offer, kind of stuff.
Isn't that heavily based off of just like the
Good guy punches the bad guy, kind of thing.
but that's not always the
Alan Moore
solution.
seems to be
And like
sure.
it
Like
sounds like a oversimplification of the
movies
thing.
are kind of like that, right?
Is it? Because Thanos snaps away like half of the universe or whatever, and then when Thor does try to be like, "Well, I'm just gonna like cut his head off," they talk about the future.
Right. And then like in the movie they defeat him by like punching him into submission and then like kill him.
That's not how they actually like save the day, though. Though, like the whole point of when Thor cuts Thanos' head off in Endgame,
Like the later
but
part of
like that doesn't actually like solve anything.
Thanos.
I'm sorry, I missed the last part you said.
I'm not talking about the Thanos that they assassinate in the beginning of the movie.
Well, at the end of the movie, Tony Stark undoes Thanos' crazy reality manipulation bullshit
Yeah.
by also using crazy reality manipulation bullshit.
And everything is like pretty much fine. We don't have to like rebuild the world. We can just snap it all back.
Well, that's because the whole like conflict of that film is that someone had snapped it all away.
Dragon has like a kind of maturity that like beyond like Marvel comic books or something, right? Okay.
Stretch.
What?
Sometimes, Ryan, when you make these statements,
Like what
I have
Eric
to say,
is talking about. He's like, I
Ryan,
didn't like these like lame ass Marvel books, so I'm trying to like write something better.
but Ryan, I'm just saying,
I'm saying that like the movies are at the level of those lame Marvel books.
Ryan, again, I just got to say that when you like say some of your takes, I feel like you do have to calm down. You've been reading a lot of Savage Dragon. Name one Marvel book that you've read in the last 10 years of your life.
I'm not like saying that. I'm just saying that's what the people like. That's what Eric Larson making the Savage Dragon is like referring to Marvel books.
But do you have your own perspective? Like it's just weird. It's just weird to hear you say certain stuff, and I know that you haven't read it. You know, like
It's not my perspective.
It's from whose perspective?
Because it's like I'm like, so this article thing comes out and Alan Moore's talking about this shit, right?
Right.
And like Alan Moore's not here to elaborate further.
Right.
So I'm just trying to relate what I think he's trying to get at. But it's not like my point of view.
Well, when you brought up the like Savage Dragon maturity comparison to Marvel, that did sound like it was more you transitioning into your own thoughts. Because Alan Moore didn't say anything about
It's
Savage.
more like I'm shifting to like Eric Larson's view of like Marvel.
Okay.
Because like the main, I guess like the largest like superhero movie things are like the Marvel movie.
Because I don't think Eric Larson was talking about the maturity of Marvel books. Because I remember the quote that you're talking about, because we've talked about it in the past. I don't think we've talked about it on the podcast before, so the audience might be a little bit lost. But he was talking about how the Marvel books were like a mess. I don't remember him saying anything about the maturity of the Marvel stories or how the characters like solve problems. So I'm not sure how it necessarily
Maybe Eric
relates.
isn't a great enough example for that. But I think that like whatever you perceive as a maturity difference between like Marvel books at that time or something and like the Savage Dragon, like that kind of like gulf and difference, which isn't even to the level I don't think that Alan Moore like would want, or like you're saying that like comics should be at, to say that they've like matured or changed or something. Like like that like the Savage Dragon is a kind of like middle ground between like the children's comics and like adult level like themes and books, and that like it's still not quite there.
I
But
think that
uh,
Alan Moore would disagree based on what we've heard from the quotes. And I agree with you're saying that Alan Moore isn't here. He can't like defend himself. I'm only going off the excerpts, but people know that. People know like the context of what we're referring to. It sounds like Alan Moore would say that Savage Dragon is just another example of a superhero comic that takes itself too seriously. I feel like Alan Moore doesn't think there is a middle ground. He's not saying that superhero comics can like talk about these mature things and be mature, because he's saying that they're like inherently absurd and for children, and that unless they recognize their absurdity and are more like stuff like the Adam West Batman, just as an example, that they're like missing the point and that they're straying too far from their origins. Which again, I
or not even the origin, because like is maybe it's that like the origin is like the purpose of the comic, of these like superhero comic books. Like you stray too far from like, the origins of the 30s for children shit, and that's just like what Superman and these guys were and should still be like are.
but see how that's gatekeeping? See how it's like a weird like it should be like how it was and it shouldn't change. But that's just not how like culture is.
No, but like they
It does
still
like
are.
evolve and
But
change
they've
over
like,
time.
but they've like conceive, not even conceive, but like they like in the way that we're talking about, like they're not self-aware to like realize or something that they still are at that level of like golden age lame shit.
But they're just not though. Like, have you read like a golden age comic versus a modern comic? I recently have been doing a lot of both, where I'll read like Savage Dragon and then I'll read like a golden age like Silver Streak story or something like that. Or I can just directly compare modern stuff to old stuff. They're very different ballparks. They're not the same thing.
Okay, so like Adam Moore is like he's like um that there's not the kind of, or there's not the kind of like admonishing, I guess, of people who would like read more modern, or it's not even like it's like of 80s comic book graphic novels to like those earlier like golden age things, because it's not like this past tense thing of like the 80s, I guess,
Well,
because
the reason why
he
he's talking
also hasn't brought up like modern comics like at all.
Well, that's because Alan Moore doesn't
He's
have
talking about like
context.
80 comics and like superhero movies.
That's because Alan Moore doesn't really have context
Right.
for modern comics,
Right.
or for modern superhero movies even.
Right.
He hasn't been reading or watching either, and I feel like he has an opinion about those things that is like an uninformed opinion. It's based on like observations that even
I
he
feel like
admits are like
he's
possibly
not wrong,
coincidental.
but I feel like him sitting down to like watch the movies wouldn't affect what he's saying. It would
It
still be
could.
true. Even if he had seen, I could like reference stuff from like the Marvel movies or like the Superman movies and stuff from like of late.
I
You
feel
know,
like it's hard to say
and he's not
what his opinion
talking a
would
lot
be.
about like the details of particular movie. He's talking about like,
But he is talking about like the content though. When he talks about how it's like an escapist fantasy thing and how
but he's talking about how the
that's
people like, react to the movies. Like he's talking about the people in relation to the same thing with the comic. Like he's talking about the people in relation to them reading kids' books, but wanting to not feel like they're reading kids' books.
it's really weird when we keep like saying like kids books, especially when you have companies like DC who are straight up like we have DC Inc,
Black Label.
DC Zoom, yeah, and like Black Label, and we're like making sure that you know who the audience is for each of these different types of books. And they just have like a whole thing.
Right, but like what you're saying for is would Alan Moore like really like what is the fundamental difference between like normal books and like the Black Label? Like is it just like more nudity and violence?
So I think Alan Moore
Isn't that more
would
mature?
probably laugh at like the concept of Black Label based on like what I'm hearing from the quotes. Like I think he'd be like from just a conceptual point of view, like that's going further from just recognizing that it's all silly stuff for kids.
Like because
Try and like
you
have the
never
audacity to say
it's
it's like
not
more adult.
like edge of Batman. It's still like a grown man running around town wearing a bat costume, punching people, you know?
That's in large part just like a part of like the like fiction, like just a part of the world that they exist in. That's just something they do. It'd be like if Alan Moore was like, man, it's crazy all these people reading medieval fantasy stuff. You got all these wizards running around wearing like ridiculous big ass hats with like, yeah, and it'd be like, but that's just what they do there. That's just like what they do in their world.
You don't have to wear big ass hats.
They don't have to wear big ass hats, but that's just like an iconic thing. When you imagine a wizard, you might just imagine him like in like these robes and stuff, and it's kind of like an audience expectation. It doesn't have
I
to
mean,
be there,
the wizard doesn't have to be goofy in his outfit.
but in many cases can be. In the same way that a
Comic books
superhero doesn't have to be
don't,
goofy in his
they
outfit.
still are, you know?
Like John Constantine, he exists within like the DC universe with like all these crazy characters. He just dresses like a normal dude.
Right, but it's not.
Thunder just wears like normal clothes and stuff like that.
It's about like how they portray themselves, I guess.
But it's
Like, does John
that's a part
Constantine
of it.
solve problems that much differently from the weird bat guy?
John Constantine does solve his problems differently than the weird bat guy.
How does John Constantine solve his problems differently?
So he's like a con man. He's really good about like outsmarting people and like using like detective work and talking himself out of his problems. When John Constantine gets cancer and like one of his most famous storylines, he doesn't go up to the cancer beast and punch him in the face and it like kills his cancer or whatever. It's like he has to like outsmart the leaders of hell by setting up a series of deals with them individually while keeping these deals secret from them. And then at the time of his death, when they all try to claim his soul, they realize that if they do, they'll like fulfill a prophecy that says that heaven will win in the war between heaven and hell, and then they're like, well, then John Constantine can't die because if we take his soul, then that means that we lose the fight. So it's like this fucking like 4D chess, like I have to like
Different from
plan
how
out all the
Batman does
variables thing. I mean, Batman sometimes has to solve like a bunch of clues, but he doesn't always outsmart people necessarily. Like,
it's like it's like Jet's like I'm trying to defend this stuff, I guess, but by like delving deeper into the lore. I'm like the lore isn't like what Alan Moore is. He's not talking about like the lore of like it. Delving into the lore isn't gonna defend like the comics from Moore's accusations
I
of them.
don't
It
know why you're saying I'm like delving into the lore. You asked me, does Constantine solve his problem
he doesn't.
any differently than
Fan
Batman? And then I went into an example, like a very famous example, of
from the
how
lore.
John Constantine solves his problems and how it's different from like how Batman would in like a very bare bones Batman story. Like something you might see in a Batman the Brave and the Bold episode, where a lot of times it's
I don't mean
punching someone in the
different in
face.
terms of their actions. I mean like different like philosophically that.
Definitely. They're definitely different. John Constantine doesn't give a fuck about shooting somebody. I don't think I've ever seen him shoot a gun. He
No,
does not seem like the type who would be
I
different.
either. Uh,
Like, what do you mean by philosophical? Like, are you talking about like the character's philosophy? Because I'm saying Batman and John
I mean, like the
Constantine are a
philosophy of
world
like
different.
for heroism.
I mean, how are you defining the philosophy of superheroism
I
for
think
Constantine versus
Alan
Batman?
Moore is trying to get at is that those kind of like philosophies like of superheroes like as a group in the way that like the things that he's like parroting in Watchmen like that it hasn't like developed from those things like the things that he was making fun of in Watchmen are still the case.
Again, is it a bad thing that superhero comics are the way that they are? It seems like Alan Moore would say yes, because they're not like these campy things for kids. And then I would say no, it's not a bad thing because it's okay for people
There
to
still can't
like
be
what
things
they
for kids
like.
he's getting at. Like no matter how edgy and dressing it up in like Batman's dick you're showing, it's still a campy thing for kids. It's not actually that adult. It's just pretends to be more adult, even though it isn't.
Well, I guess my question, Ryan, would be how do you draw the line between something that's for a kid and for an adult? What's like the determining factor?
Yeah, it is difficult. He even says that.
Well,
That
then
the
how is he defining it? Because if he's
no, I don't
with
know.
his thing, then
Well,
it's
it's like
then is he really saying much of anything at all?
like, y'all, it's a shit for kids. Stop like making a big deal about it so much.
But it's like, does he have a good argument for like it's just stuff for kids and like it's not there's nothing deeper to it? I feel like if he had specific examples where he was like, for example, look at this book that or movie that people say is like, oh, like adults can enjoy it, and then he like tore it apart, like he had some deeper analysis where he's like,
It's not that adults
you
can't enjoy kids shit, right? Like you can read like The Hungry Caterpillar and enjoy that. But that doesn't just because adults can enjoy things that are for kids doesn't make it more adult than it was.
but some things that are superhero media just aren't made for kids. So I'm like, how are you defining it as like it is for kids other than saying original comic books were made for kids? Because there's just a difference, right? Like
What
the
Alan Moore
first
was getting
Batman comic, right?
at, the Batman things haven't actually developed to the degree that they're not still for kids.
But how is he defining that? Where's the line where he would go,
He
and
isn't drawing that
now it's for adults?
that isn't the thing that gets them.
Because if he doesn't say what the line is, then he's just kind of saying something.
Right.
Right. So that's why I'm like, I still disagree. Like, it's just a thing where it's like, if you say that Batman Damned is a Batman story that's made for adults, written for an adult audience, and then prepared in such a way to where you're like, kids shouldn't read it, adults specifically should read it. It's like, is that, like, are those things on their own not enough for you to say that it's not for kids?
No, but
It's not.
it's
Then,
like
like,
kind of like what we're where it's like no matter what adult type like writing you can have, like the kind of like concepts of a guy dressing up as a bat, thinking he's like a superhero, is like a kid fantasy type thing.
but it still doesn't make the story for kids. You know, like stuff like Happy, which was written by Grant Morrison, is about this dude who's a very like unlikable asshole, but throughout the book he's hanging out with like an imaginary cartoony unicorn. And you could look at that and be like, imaginary cartoony unicorn, that inherently is just like a thing for kids. It's like,
Maybe
but that story's clearly not for children, and it's not like a children's story.
Kid would like write this kind of story, right? Like a Batman thing, right? Like a kid with his action figures doing a Batman thing. Where like you can make it more like complicated and like, you know, supposedly like mature and stuff with like the dialogue and like the lore, make it more complicated and weird and stuff. But like how would
You're throwing me when you're like, this is the stories are still stuff that a kid would make with his action figure.
I'm not talking about the story. I'm talking about like the concept of a Batman.
Why is the concept the like end all be all?
Right.
Any concept can be made into like a story that's for adult entertainment specifically.
Right. Okay.
Even,
So
like you could even talk about like porn.
trying to
You can make porn of stuff that like conceptually is like not like super mature, but then it becomes a mature thing like through the transformation.
recognizing such a transformation having taken place. Because like if you want to tell adult stories in comic books, then drop the whole Batman thing. Like stop having him dress up as a bat and actually have him grow up, right? And like mature.
But you can still tell stories that have like adult themes and adult problems.
It sounds like what is it like you're still holding yourself back by not like letting go of this like comic book superhero shit.
I don't see how it's holding yourself back from anything because it still comes back to like the idea that it's like a gatekeeping thing. Like Alan Moore saying you can't tell adult stories if you come from this like superhero like foundation because he's like from a foundational level superheroes are like these silly like campy things. And I'm like, but that doesn't mean that you can't do mature things with these concepts and that you can't tell mature stories.
How mature
for adults
are they getting though? I think is that kind of like the response to.
But then Alan Moore saying, how mature are they getting? And then shrugging, and then you go, well, have you looked at any of the modern stuff to see how mature it's getting? And then he goes, no, because it can't recognize that it's not absurd. It's like it's weird to not look at it and then say it's bad, because that just feels like that's what he's doing.
Like if he's getting at like it's still absurd. Like if he read modern stuff, I feel like he wouldn't still just be like, well, it's still absurd. Like no matter what you actually try and make Batman do that's cool and adult, he's still like a weirdo Batman.
I mean, has Alan Moore read stuff like Batman Ego, which is like an older like Batman thing, where it talks about how Batman is kind of just like a crazy guy, and that he has to kind of come to terms with the fact that he's crazy, and that if he stopped being Batman, that he would probably like kill himself or whatever. It was written in like 2000. There are plenty of like introspective superhero pieces that do dive into the fact that like the stuff that they do is kind of crazy, but it's
Okay.
kind of a part of
You
who they
think
are, and it's a part of the world.
since the 1980s then that there has been a kind of like actual development in like
Know how many comics
comics,
existed
like
in
the comics.
1980?
What?
Do you know how many comics existed in 1980?
No.
Do you know how many comics exist now? Do you know how many comics Alan Moore read in 1980?
No.
Do you know how many comics Alan Moore has read now?
No.
You know, it's like he
Right.
doesn't know the breadth of the medium. Not everyone has read like literally every comic, and it's very hard to make these like super generalized statements without having like some like foundation in the thing. Like if this interview came out during the time where Alan Moore was still watching superhero movies and during the time where he was still reading comics, I feel like there would probably be more power
Right.
to what he's saying,
Okay.
that he's
So
familiar with the content.
what if what he's saying, right? Because I think this is what you're getting at, and maybe I'll just like join you that or okay. So what if we try and figure out why he's saying any of it? Because essentially what he's saying is like, no, I don't read any of that new shit, and then he's trying to come up with some reason why. And Jet's like, I don't think that's a good reason. Like Jet's like his arguments don't pan out. I'm like, okay, sure. Like I don't think they're fully fleshed out. Like do you think he has like a better reason for like not reading any of the new shit other than just like I'm just done with it? Like it sounds like he gave up on comics or a bunch of these comics. Like I guess maybe as a genre, kind of like in the 80s. Like he feels like it's stagnated or something.
Right. Like it sounds
And like
like from his perspective, he's like, I stopped reading comics and I grew
I
up.
don't know if he stopped reading, but he's at least stopped watching comic book movies. And I feel like he seems to think that comic like it might be that he thinks that like modern comics are just at the level of comic book movies in terms of like simplicity and like kidification and stuff.
But is he reading modern comics?
No, like he was writing comics up until 2018. I don't know if
That
he
doesn't
read
mean you read shit though.
right.
Yeah? Let's see. Right now I have the interview pulled up. I need to pull the interview up not on this computer but on this computer so that the audience can see it.
Not on this computer, but on this computer.
Yeah, I have
Is the
another
one that has
computer.
OBS running?
So I have multiple computers in front of me, and one of
And then I
the
gestured
is
at
like a
it.
light source. And then the other one is like the one that they can actually see what's on screen. So I'm gonna jump over to this one, so that people can see the article as I'm like scrolling through it. So what I'm gonna do is just use Control F and type in comics, so I can find like specific mentions of when he like says whether or not he does or doesn't read comics. Let's see. He said, I'm not so interested in comics anymore. I don't want anything to do with them. This is stuff that you read earlier. I have been doing comics for 40 something years. I finally retired. blah blah blah. I want to find if he ever does state if he like is currently reading comics or not. Let's see. Something, 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 something. Just the stuff that Ryan had said earlier when he was reading quotes. Let's see. He said, I doubt the major companies will be coming out of lockdown in any shape at all. The mainstream comics industry is about 80 years old and has a lot of pre existing health conditions. Let's see. I'm still trying to figure out like if he talks about stuff. I got lost when he started talking about comic book blockbusters, essentially. Like the idea that the entertainment industry can make all these like really big things that dominate the market. He said it's too early to make optimistic predictions, but excuse me, you might hope that the bigger interest will find it more difficult to maneuver in this new landscape, whereas the smaller independent concerns might find that they are a bit more adapted. It seems like he's like this is like a new opportunity for like indie stuff because it seems like the big wigs are gonna take a hit. Let's see. So, still trying to see if he reads comics. It never really says if he still reads comics or not. At least not from what I saw. Ryan, with you also looking at the same article, did you see any mention of whether or not he still reads them? Because I didn't with my skin. Ryan. Did Ryan fall asleep? Is he unconscious? Oh no! The call disconnected. I don't know how long it wasn't there. That's my bad. I had the article window pulled up, so I just couldn't see. I don't think it says whether or not he. Ryan's trying to call me at the same time. What happened if I answer him on my phone? Ryan, I'm trying to call you on the desktop. Answer or whatever.
I am answering on the calling you on the desktop.
Don't call me on the desktop. Let me call you on the desktop. Okay. Okay. Hey, well,
No, but what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to like video call you on the thing.
you can turn on your video if you want.
Yeah, because we're on the audio call.
You
It says to enable video, end this call and start a video call. Because they're like two different types of calls.
when I initially called you, I hit video. Also, you can hit the turn on video button on your screen if you're on desktop.
No. There's.
Watch this. Oh, well, when I clicked it, it didn't do anything. So. It got me.
Yeah, I'm watching that. You know we're on an audio call though, right?
But I didn't call you on an audio call initially. I called you on a video call.
When you were calling me again, you just
redial on the existing video call.
No, you're sending me new audio calls.
How? Like I said, all I did was hit
On
redial.
Facebook Messenger, there's the phone button, which is to start
I
a
hit the
phone call.
camera button.
Well, it says missed audio call.
My
We're in
Facebook.
audio call right now.
My Facebook URL is facebook.com/video call.
I know it says that, but we're in an audio call.
But I didn't call you on an audio call.
Okay,
No, what's.
well, call me on a video chat.
I already did.
And you didn't.
Ryan out here making.
We're just in an audio thing. And I was like, okay, well, like, let me try and get a video. And I was like, oh, we're not in a video enabled call.
You
So,
already were.
so
Oh, wait,
I'll
wait, wait.
call Jet to do a video
Oh,
call.
Ryan, I think I understand what happened. Remember, I was having a weird error thing where I couldn't call you. So then you called me, which means you called me initially as an audio call.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So now I want to do a video call.
Why did you call me initially as an audio call?
I made a mistake that way. Because usually you call me. So like 3/4 of the way in, I wanted to turn the video on. But then I was like, oh, we're in an audio call. I can't do that.
So
Then I
here's.
hung up and I was trying to like call you again on the video one, but then you didn't answer. And
So
you're like, don't call me. I'll call you. And so when you called me, it was on audio calls again. I'm like, but this isn't what I wanted. I want the video
Ryan,
thing.
I think we've already been buried now. Uh, I think I have an idea of how we might be able to fix it. So I'm going to close the video capture that I have for the current call. So I'm going to remove that. That way, when the call window doesn't go away, it doesn't pull up some random shit on my computer. Now, the second thing, you call me with a video call. We'll hang up this call, and then you call me with a video. I'll answer that call, and then we should be Gucci.
That's what I was trying to do.
Okay.
But you wouldn't answer the new call.
Well, that's because the new call didn't appear on my computer. It appeared on my phone. So I didn't have any way to answer
Like when you
the
call me, it
video
was
call.
both.
It didn't hit both.
The phone will ring and the
It was
computer.
already on this one. It didn't ring two things.
Ah.
My phone. That's what I keep saying.
Are you on Facebook on the computer?
I closed Facebook after I started up the video call because
That was a mistake. Now you can't answer new calls.
But it's not a mistake because it's a thing where if one window closes, OBS goes, "What's your next open window?" And I'm not trying to put people's messages on blast. That's happened before. Nothing bad came out of it, but it's better safe than sorry.
But if you close Facebook, like I don't mean Messenger, I mean like just on like the normal Facebook thing.
Well, then that also just puts whatever thing I'm looking at on Facebook.
Sure, but it also means that if you close that window, you wouldn't be able to like receive the new call.
Well, why is it that you like decided to do a video call without just saying, "Hey, Jet, I want to do a video"? Like we could have.
I thought you would just answer.
Well, you made an assumption, Ryan, and now we're in this situation. But let's hang up this call. You call me for a video call. I'll answer it, and then we'll be good.
Okay.
Okay. Do 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 do. Do 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 do. Hey, there we go. Fuck. So my computer doesn't want to do video calls for some reason. I keep getting like an error where it says you gotta restart Chrome or restart your computer. So I think maybe that's the issue. Maybe right now I can only support voice calls, but I don't know why. Yo, Ryan, are you there? Hello? Hello? I don't hear anything. Let me try him again. I'm gonna redial. Yo, Brian, for whatever reason, that Chrome error keeps happening. So it's not just when I try to video call you, it's also
You just
when
can't
you
do
try to
video
video
call.
call me.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So it says whenever I try to do a video call or whenever I receive one that it's like you either need to restart Chrome or restart your computer. So right now, I think we're just stuck in a voice call thing. But now we know that that's what's happening because we didn't have all that information before. So now, Ryan, I need to
Also, the
add
thing with
a new
the
window
URL
capture.
saying video call is that like the Facebook call desktop pop-out window is like essentially the same as like structure-wise as like the video one. It just has like a different like icon.
I think
This is like only accessing your microphone.
I think it's weird that you can't transition from one to another. Like the fact that you can't just hit the little like
They have like two different types of because like on desktop it would seem weird, but I think because like on like mobile it's like one is more like a normal phone call, and then the other one is kind of like a FaceTime. Because like it's like the way that like phone calls and like FaceTime are like separate apps on like your phone. On the desktop it doesn't really matter because it's like the same kind of thing looking. I guess, and maybe that's why like the URL is like the same.
but with stuff like Zoom, it's like you can choose whether or not you're on video or if you just do voice. Like it sounds like it's perfectly like it's not impossible to make an app where it just does both, you know?
Yeah, but like Facebook has them as like separate features.
And I'm saying that's stupid. That's like that's my whole argument. I'm like it could just be one thing. And it presents itself like it's one thing because the voice call has a button. It has a button that just says turn on video. But then when I click it, nothing happens. What is that button
It's
for?
grayed out. It says to enable video, end this call and start a video call.
That's dumb. Why would like why is it a
I
button
tell
you
you.
can't hit?
Like the other thing for screen sharing is like screen sharing is only available for video call.
That sounds dumb.
Because this pop out window, because it like in the access thing, it only like asks to access your microphone. On the video call, it asks like the computer to access your microphone and the like webcam.
Then why
So
is it that when you hit the
this
camera button that it
whole
doesn't ask to
this
use your
whole like
camera?
window app thing on Facebook isn't designed to ask for video.
But that's a dumb. It should ask for video if you click the video button. And then if you decline, it should say can't do video because you didn't say yeah to the camera. Right?
I mean, maybe, but that's just
That
how
doesn't
it is on
right.
Facebook.
I'm just saying it's dumb. I'm agreeing that's just how it is. I'm like you could just implement it.
Like, what's the reason? Like, I still don't know if we know the reason why they're separate in the first
But
place.
there are also just other apps though that let you do both, which is why I'm like
That's just the video thing, and then you just like turn off the camera. In the same way that like, you know, like how we have like the video call, you could just like turn off the feed for like the camera.
well, with Zoom, you can choose to never turn your camera on in
Right.
the first place.
And the same thing with the video call.
But I'm
But they
saying,
didn't explain
then
why
why
they
isn't
have
it just one
separate like,
thing then?
phone audio calls and video calls. Because the video call, you can also just have it be black screen the whole time.
Right. I feel like you could have it be one call, and then if your device doesn't have a camera,
Good,
something
right?
weird like that.
Good. You
Right.
can. But that doesn't answer why
It
Facebook
isn't.
has it separate,
Right.
which we don't know.
I'm also curious why I get a Chrome error for the video.
Not the audio.
Yeah, because it seems like they're essentially, as we've said,
But maybe it's like
the same
some
thing.
sort of like thing with like trying to access the camera. Like whatever differences there are between and the video, like the only ones I can think of is just like it has like the video component. So
Maybe
Wouldn't it be something with the video component that's getting the error?
Maybe it's an OBS thing. I updated OBS today, and I haven't had this issue in the past with our previous podcast. Maybe OBS is like using the camera in such a way now to where other things can't use the camera. Do you think that might be it?
Maybe. Like to do both, you would have to get like a separate like webcam feed. Like have two cameras.
Well, no, not necessarily. Like, because this time around I started OBS before entering the call. Now I'm curious what would happen if I had started the call
Then
and then started OBS.
I guess that could be it or something.
But that's something we'd probably have to test just like another time, I would say.
Maybe.
Maybe. I couldn't find any portion of that article where it said that Alan Moore stopped reading comics. He might still read comics. I don't know. He says he's done with comics, but that could be from the perspective of just writing.
Yeah, I think that meant like him making comics.
But then, based on the other stuff that he said, like, is he like I don't know? Because you think he'd shout out something if he is reading something, right? Like you'd think he'd be like, "Why
Right, but
are comics like
this is like
example?"
there wasn't like this kind of like because he mentions in the thing like there wasn't this like adult uh kind of growing up of comics in the 80s except for a couple like titles. So maybe he's only reading a couple titles that he thinks are grown up, but they probably just aren't even like comic like superhero comics or anything.
I'm not sure. Now, we've been on for like over an hour and a half, specifically talking about the Alan Moore interview. There's some other interesting stuff that's happened today. I actually came into this call with like a whole
Yeah, I know.
topics on the mind. Um,
Completely derailed Jet's whole career plan.
did you hear about the Green Lantern's HBO Max show?
I saw the headline that like it's just gonna have a bunch of the other lanterns and not like Hal and John or something.
So the lanterns they picked are kind of spicy, not gonna lie. So we got Jessica Cruz,
Jessica Cruz, Simon Baz, and who else?
Jessica Cruz, Simon Baz, Guy Gardner.
Oh yeah, and Alan Scott.
Yeah, Alan Scott and like
Before that,
Estro are like confirmed.
yeah.
So Alan Scott is a crazy pick.
No. Think
Never.
about how it's not gonna be like cool Alan Scott. It's gonna be like lame, modern, like gay Alan Scott.
So
Like that's what I think they're good. I think like it's gonna be like all those weird or not weird, like all the complaints that you were having with like the Alan Scott like comic book story or whatever. It was like the train death and all that kind of stuff. I think it's gonna be more like that version of Alan Scott.
okay, so let's get the audience up to speed about the Alan Scott thing. So Alan Scott is the first ever Green Lantern. He's not affiliated with the Green Lantern Corps. His ring is magic. It's not necessarily built off of like alien technology, though it does come from the Star Heart, which is like a sci-fi thing. But whatever. Alan Scott Green Lantern originally has like two kids, Obsidian and Jade. I don't think that it was ever hinted at that Alan Scott was like gay, but his son Obsidian was gay. Then we had the New
A
52.
designated gay character or something.
Like yeah, he wasn't like a designated gay character. So the New 52 hits, and in the New 52, DC Comics says we're gonna get rid of all of our like older characters. So like the Justice Society of America just doesn't exist on like Earth Zero because all the superheroes have only been around for like
5 years.
so you can't have any of the older characters. But they realize that there's like a consequence to that. Like if you get rid of all of the JSA people, you also then end up getting rid of like their kids. So they're like, oh, if we get rid of like Alan Scott, that means we're also getting rid of his son Obsidian. And if we get rid of his son Obsidian, that
We got rid of the designated gay character.
Right. And they're like, if we have one less gay character, people could be like, the new 52 is like eliminating diversity. It's like the comics are less diverse now. So, in order to try and avoid potential backlash from them essentially removing a diverse character, they said, okay, well, the new 52 will have like a multiverse, and on one of the Earths, specifically Earth 2, we'll have Alan Scott, but he'll be like a young new Alan Scott, and he'll just be like our like
The designated gay character.
right that we have for like the sake of diversity. Uh, their handling of Alan Scott in the New 52 has been critically panned. People feel like they didn't do a very good job at having like diversity and showing.
Like, who is like the detail? Like, who is making this like show?
Okay, so
Would it be someone who would recognize that like New 52 Alan Scott was shitty, and then like actually like change their version to be not shitty?
so for one, Ryan, I don't think it's gonna be New 52 Alan Scott. I don't think that's the approach they're gonna take.
Or like rebirth Alan Scott?
I think it's gonna be like rebirth Alan Scott. But let's get to that real quick. I still haven't gotten everybody up to speed yet. So Alan Scott in the New 52, they made him gay, and people didn't necessarily like how they handled it. They felt like a lot of his story elements that involved him being gay were either like heavily like ignored or rushed through. So they just didn't really handle it well. Then, after the events of Doomsday Clock, the Justice Society of America and characters like Alan Scott were reintroduced into continuity as if they had never left. But then they changed Alan Scott to make him gay. So now Alan Scott, in normal continuity, who was not gay before and had two kids, is gay and still has two kids. So we went from just having Obsidian be gay originally to not having Obsidian, but now Alan Scott's gay, to now having two gay Alan Scotts and a gay Obsidian. What's weird about it, besides that, is the fact that now that Alan Scott was made gay in the New 52, there's this big push by DC to make Alan Scott gay everywhere. Every time Alan Scott appears in something, he is now also gay in that thing, even though Alan Scott historically just wasn't gay before. So, like in the Injustice Year Zero comic,
He was always the designated gay character.
right? Like they're essentially making it where if you put Alan Scott in something, he's gonna be gay, and that's what they're doing again with the HBO Max Green Lantern show. I was watching a Beyond the Trailer video where Grace, the host of Beyond the Trailer, said, I noticed that in like every press release, they make sure to mention that Alan Scott in the show is going to be gay. And she's like, that's not like a coincidence. She's like, I'm pretty sure when DC announced everything, they made sure to be like, yo, and say that he's gay. You gotta say that he's gay as a part of the press release or whatever. And she's very wary of it because she's like, I don't know if the writers will do a good job with it. Now, Ryan, you were asking about the writers. The guy who worked on the Green Lantern movie starring Ryan Reynolds that was panned, he's on it. Jeff Johns, who wrote like some good Green Lantern story. Like Jeff Johns has good experience with writing Green Lantern stuff. He's on it, and a few others. That's based on what was released in the press release and what Grace from Beyond the Trailer was talking about. I feel kind of weird about the Green Lantern show, I guess for like a number of reasons. For one, I'm actually excited to see what they do with Alan Scott, because they could do a lot of things with him. They could have a young Alan Scott, kind of like the New 52 thing, where it's just he's not old, like he's the same age as everybody else. They could do an Alan Scott like they did in like the late 90s, where it's like he's old, but the ring allows him to be young, and they could tell stories about that like weird, like double life thing. where he could be old normally, but then when he becomes Green Lantern, he's a young guy. They could do Alan Scott stories like what they're doing in Rebirth, where he's just an old man all the time for some reason. Where like even though the ring should be able to make him young, he just doesn't use it to do that. So he's old with or without the ring. And they could even do something like it's Alan Scott, but it's not a magic ring. Like he's actually a member of the Corps. They could try to do that too. Like there's a whole lot of wiggle room for them to do whatever with Alan Scott, and they could have his kids in it. Like Obsidian could potentially be in it. Jade could potentially be in it. We don't really know. But to be honest, if they had announced an Alan Scott show, I would probably be more hyped than a Green Lantern show with all these different lanterns. I feel like there are too many cooks in the kitchen. Alan Scott has no business being in a show that has like Simon Baz and Jessica Cruz, because I don't even think those characters have ever interacted before, like ever. So there's just no reason for it. There's no like precedent for them to be in a thing together. And Guy Gardner is known to be like an unlikable, like arrogant dick. Like his character is not someone who you're supposed to like, and they're either gonna stick by that and have this like really unlikable Guy Gardner, or they're gonna give him an arc that makes him likable. And I don't know if people will like that or not. Like I feel like some people would be like, if you make him likable, that like ruins the character. They've done it in comics before, where Guy Gardner has become nice, and there's a famous line where Batman like punches Guy Gardner in the face and says something along the lines of, "I liked you better when you were an asshole." So I don't know what they're gonna do with him. He's like a mess on his own right.
You can't redeem Guy Gardner, and he's not Guy Gardner anymore.
I think the best Guy Gardner redemption story that I've ever read was a Future's End story. Back when the New 52 was like, these are all our characters in the future. This is canon, what's going to happen in the future. And then they never did anything with Future's End ever again. But,
It sounds like a thing the DC would do.
right. In that, Guy Gardner ends up becoming a Blue Lantern. And he talks about his journey, because Guy Gardner's been a whole bunch of stuff. He's been a Green Lantern, he's had a Yellow Lantern ring before, he was the leader of the Red Lantern Corps for a little bit. There was a time where he was a character called Warrior, and he was like a shapeshifter. Like Guy Gardner's constantly changing and doing different shit. So him becoming a Blue Lantern actually is like a big switch up for his character. But at the same time, it's kind of status quo for him because he's always switching up. And he talks about how when you become a Blue Lantern, you see a vision for the future. And that vision of the future gives you hope. And he's like traveling around finding Red Lanterns and showing them this vision. And it allows them to be freed from their Red Lantern rings. Because normally if you're a Red Lantern and you take your ring off, you just die. You can't just like quit. And I thought that was actually like a really good arc for Guy Gardner. They were just taking him in the direction of what would finally make Guy Gardner like not an ass. And they essentially said the only way to do it is to show Guy Gardner that he can not be an ass and that it'll make the world better. Like you essentially have to show him this like truth to reality that shows him like, oh, I just shouldn't be an ass, like a cosmic thing. And then he's like, now I'm not an ass. I feel like that was probably the most satisfying like arc of Guy Gardner that I've seen. I don't think we're gonna see that in this Lantern show. I think what we will see is him being just a dick to everybody, but not being a bad guy. Like Sinestro will be a dick, and they'll be like, "Oh, boo, boo, Sinestro, oh, you're evil," and then Guy will be a dick, and they'll be like, "Oh, Guy, shut the hell up, you're fine," and then that'll be a thing. Maybe Guy won't be a Green Lantern. What if they did like Red Lantern Guy Gardner? What are your thoughts on that?
Why red?
He was the leader of the Red Lantern Corps for a time. Like, that's just straight up a thing that happened in the comics, and it kind of fits more with his personality, anyways.
Sounds like it rained a little bit or something. What about like Orange Lantern Guy Gardner? How much color variation do you think that we'll see? Like, yeah, we'll get green, get red, I guess. Like, do you think we'll see like indigo? Where's the indigo at?
I mean, I don't think we're gonna
Like blue,
see. I don't think we're gonna see Indigo necessarily.
violet,
Um, there's a
orange.
comic called Green Lanterns with an S. That's like a team up book of Jessica Cruz Green Lantern and Simon Baz Green Lantern. And since those two characters are in this HBO Max show, I imagine they're going to be taking a lot of inspiration from that series because they just have a ton of story arcs that they can pull from
Like the
and
show.
use.
Are they all gonna be like together as like a group of four? Or are they gonna be like independent in this show?
Um,
Cut to them, like cut to like Alan Scott and then cut to Guy Gardner and cut to like even just the two of them. Like, do you think there'll be like three groups and then they'll like meet up at some point? Like, or maybe even start it that way?
so I think Alan Scott will be the most disconnected from them, if I have to guess. Like, I think he'll be in the show, but he'll probably not be as heavily featured because he doesn't really mesh with like the space Green Lantern stuff. He has
No
little
thing.
to nothing to
I
do
don't
with
have
it.
like any. Like, when is it supposed to like come out?
So I think they originally said it was going to come out in 2021, but I think the press release doesn't give a date. Because the Mosaic Comics video was like, the press release doesn't say anything. So he's like, I'm assuming it'll be 2022 at the latest, is what Mosaic Comics said. Um,
So they didn't say a date.
right. Well, they said a date in the past, and then the press release is saying the show is like finally like been ordered before they announced that they were gonna do a show. But I guess that was like a early announcement. Now they've ordered 10 1 hour long episodes. So it's gonna be like a 10-hour Green Lantern series on HBO Max. Um, I kind of feel weird about that. Oh, the call failed. Cool. Technical student. The technical difficulties. Working on Facebook. Hey, welcome back. So, I think it's weird that they're gonna do 10 1 hour long episodes. I kind of wish they had given shows to the different lanterns. Like, instead of having one show that's like, it's Simon Bass, and Jessica Cruz, and it's Kilowog, and it's Alan Scott, and it's Sinestro, you could be like, well, what if we just gave the characters their own shows and they could cross over with each other? Because I feel like different characters are going to appeal to different audiences, and I don't want it to be a thing where I sit down and I gotta fast forward through all the Guy Gardner shit because I don't care, kind of thing. Like, I'd rather it be like, if you really like Guy Gardner, we got like a whole Guy Gardner show, and I could be like, cool, I just won't watch that. And then it's like, you like Alan Scott, you should watch the Alan Scott show. It's like, oh, I'm gonna watch the fuck out of that. I'm really excited.
Would
Then it's like,
you like? Do they have enough content to like have separate shows like that?
I mean, all
Because like
these
they're
characters
starting off with
have
like this like
huge
group
publication
of them,
histories.
right? But like still, that doesn't mean that they're like wanting to make like separate like shows for like a Guy Gardner or something. Like you could, I guess, but it sounds like they want to have some sort of. Or, they're making some kind of group show.
Well, we don't know if it's a group show or if it's like we're telling one story and all these characters are in it, but they're not like a team. Because it could be like that, where they just jump around.
Or even like alternate between episodes and then have them like meet up at the end, or maybe even not meet up. I don't know.
Right.
Like you could have like episode 1 is an Alan Scott episode. Episode 2 was like and they could just do that for 10 episodes or something. You know?
They could, and they could have
You
little
really want them to not meet up?
crossover episodes. Um, I'm curious if this Green Lantern show is going to be its own universe, or if it's supposed to be a part of the movie universe, or if it's going to be a part of the
I don't
Ryan
why,
Reynolds movie universe.
or the Zack Snyder cut movie universe.
Like specifically the
Because
Snyder
Jet's
Cut.
like they're clearly different universes.
They are, because he says none of the other stuff that comes out after Justice
Yeah, but who
in
cares what he
continuity.
says?
He's the one who would determine that. You know, as soon as you say that you're,
For his movie, but like,
but like,
does he have any control of like people trying to like ex post facto stick other things in continuity with his shit?
I mean, they could
Warner Bros.
do
Could just be
that.
like, "Yo, we're doing it. There's nothing you could do about it." You know, like you already made the movie. Like I don't, you can't stop us. You have no leverage here.
Until they do try and like, excuse me, I'm sorry. Until they do try to like attach it to the other films, it seems like he's stated it's not supposed to be. So I'd say for now,
Authorial
all
intent.
we know,
Get out of here with it.
it's not connected to the other
Um,
movies. So it's like its own bubble.
right. Or at least like with the Marvel shows or whatever they're doing, it's like very specific and explicit MCU content, right? Whereas with DC, well, they have their movie continuity. It's less like I guess not even like a premiere thing, because Marvel doesn't really have much in the way of like other TV shows besides like like Agents of Shield, but like that doesn't that matter, right? Because like Warner Bros. At least had like like their CW verse stuff that is popular enough to be like its own thing, kind of.
I don't fully understand the difference you're trying to draw between the two. Because both Marvel and DC are like, all our stuff are their own universe or whatever. And it's only when we say that things are connected that they're like the same universe. Like, what's the difference in approach?
No, I mean like Marvel doesn't really have like a separate like TV show like continuity established to put something like a new show in.
They do if you count stuff
Because
like the
DC
animated.
has their movie continuity, right? Like with the Aquaman and stuff, and then they also have like their CW show, like kind of like they're not entirely like separate and parallel because like everything is canon and all that, but like you could put it in either of those two continuities that are like still kind of like ongoing and like popular, right?
Marvel's does still have like their animated stuff, which you could argue is like, well, animated and live action are different, but that's not always true. The CW has straight up animated stuff that just is the CW verse. They're like
I know, but
animated,
like
but it's
I'm
not
saying,
different.
is that any of that Marvel anime stuff like on the level of popularity as something like the CW verse that they would consider like putting it in that kind of connection?
Well, you just straight up have like Marvel animated bangers. Like stuff like you know how you love like Avengers Earth's Mightiest
That's like an
Heroes?
older show.
It is an older
I mean,
show.
like current stuff.
But they have modern animated stuff.
Yeah, I know, but like I don't know how popular any of that is.
That's because you don't watch any of it.
Well, even if I watched it, I wouldn't know how popular it is.
You might have more of an awareness because you might talk with other people who watch
I mean,
it or look at
talk with
material
other
based
people.
around it or whatever.
I don't. I don't do it.
I know that you don't do that. I'm saying
Or at least I say I don't.
that you don't have the gauge. Sure. I don't know what that meant. Um, but what I'm saying is with their different like shows and everything that they do put in their like own respective universes, they could just as easily say, Nah, like all the cartoons and stuff, like if
I know
just
they
exist
do
in the
and they
same thing.
can't. I'm
Right.
saying, because you're like, would they put, I'm like, okay, would they put it in the TV show stuff or the movie stuff?
Wait,
Like, why would they do either? Or, like, is there a reason to?
I got confused by the question because you said stuff for a lot of things. I couldn't tell what you were delineating.
Okay. Why would they put these Green Lantern continuity, this show, in continuity with either the movies or like anything? Why would they tie it in continuity with anything else?
If the Green Lantern show does like really well, then DC could say, and it was in the like DCEU the whole time, and now Jessica Cruz and Simon Bass can show up on the Justice League, and you already know who
I mean, you
they are,
can,
and we
to
don't
the
have to like
extent of
do
like
anything.
production value differences, I guess, but that's marginal at best.
Because it's a thing where we already know that Green Lanterns exist in the DCEU. Because an alien Green Lantern shows up in Justice League in like a flashback.
Then it had any Green Lanterns in like the CW show stuff?
The CW show stuff, we've seen the Ryan Reynolds Green Lantern universe. It was shown during Crisis.
I get that it was shown, but I mean, like,
Like
have any
in
like
the
Green
CW
Lanterns
verse,
walked
you're
into
like,
frame,
I
like
don't.
on set, like, and I'm here now in the way that like the other Flashes and other characters were.
No. I don't think there's a Green
I haven't
Lantern.
heard any Green Lanterns like just be on that show.
Yeah, I
Like,
don't think they have Green Lanterns in the CW verse as of yet. Um, that being said, they could also potentially do that and be like it's on the CW verse. I doubt that though. They
but
don't
why?
really have a
Why
reason
do you
to do
doubt
that.
that?
Because
Because this is like a TV show. That's a TV show. Like, wouldn't it make more sense to just connect the TV shows than to connect it to a movie?
I don't see how it makes more sense to connect the TV shows than to connect the movies. Keep in
Okay,
mind, this is the
sure. So why do you doubt that they would, like, if it was a success, just put it with the CW stuff?
because they would probably just have the show on CW if they wanted to connect them. Like when Stargirl came out, they were like, we're gonna put Stargirl on DC Universe, but also we're gonna put it on the CW. So it's not.
You think because they're not putting it on the CW, that it's not going to be in that kind of area?
I think that's like a pretty legitimate basis, yeah. Because it's not on the CW, it probably won't be in the CW verse. Though it could at any point be folded in, similar to like Constantine. How like the Constantine show was on CBS, and then it got canceled, and then they were like, but what if he was in the CW verse the whole time? And then they just did that, and then it's fine. They can kind of put together any things they want to put together. By the way, Marvel is getting ready to start doing animated stuff that is just connected to the movies. Because their What If series is going to be like different worlds in the multiverse.
In what capacity? Like, are they going to get like the voice actors to do animated stuff?
Yes, that's the
Okay.
plan for the What If animated series for Disney Plus. But it's like,
It sounds like they're already close to that with like their just modern Marvel like Avengers cartoon was pretty much very close to the movies. Just like you didn't have, I guess, as it's weird because like they didn't have it as like we're like starting off like from the movie status quo specific, like like, oh yeah, like they attacked New York or whatever, but then they also didn't it's unclear, I think, from like the first few episodes of like what kind of status quo they like are establishing the Avengers assemble from. Like they kind of have like a flashback to like Earth's Mightiest Heroes, at least like character design or something. It was weird. So I'm like, do they even have an episode where they like meet up like this version of the Avengers team? It sounds like they're just like leaning on the movie aesthetics and design, but then not having it just be those character versions specifically.
I mean, I think that's a good description of the current Avengers cartoon. It is just
Which is like
in the
why,
designs, but not
I guess. Because you could
because
just have them be like, yeah, the things from like the things in the movie just also happened, or at least like to start from that point.
for
You
some
could, but you
reason
could also just not.
for
I'm
some
not sure.
reason Marvel doesn't want to do a like shared continuity between like the cartoon and the movie.
I mean, it sounds like they
We saw
kind
something
of
like that
not
was
do
the
now.
CGI Spider-Man cartoon. Do you remember that?
I mean, they could though.
Right. I agree. I think they should, to be honest. Like, make it where it's like all these things are the same continuity. Because the CW verse, it also has like comics. The CW verse has like season zero comics that are like prequel comics that take place in the CW verse. And then they also have like animated shows.
Well, everything has like a comic tie-in almost, right?
Well, there's a difference between having like a
The
comic.
obligatory
What were you saying?
comic, like all these like cartoons and stuff. There's always some like at least small amount of like obligatory tie-in comic.
Well, I understand where
Almost
you're
always,
there
I
with
feel like.
like the animated thing, but
Like a lot of the animated like Earth's Mightiest Heroes has a few issues of comic, so
yeah,
like Teen Titans or like Batman Like it's not very much.
right. I'm saying
It's
that
just like this small obligatory tie-in comic.
I'm saying that you can do these like multimedia things on like a CW scale. Like where it's like, why is it that the Marvel movies are not like and these cartoons take place in like
Do you mean like why they don't have like tie-in movie comics that are
I
like
think
canon?
I think there might be some, but they're just like they don't go all out with it, I guess.
Right.
Like the CW is like we don't just have like one or two animated things. It's like a whole like series. Like Vixen is just animated, but
Right.
she's like in continuity. And like how like the
They
comics
have
that are
like
like
animated stuff in continuity.
right.
Then you're also saying there's like comics
And then you
also
have
like
the
that.
yeah, they have season zero comics where it's like this comic series is in like one or two comics. It's a whole season of like The Flash, but it's just a comic book. It's like a prequel season, but you got to read the comic. You know, like the Marvel movies aren't doing stuff like that where there's like I just said there's like twice. Imagine if like Ant-Man instead of being like
Yeah, I get you can have multimedia things, and Marvel isn't really doing that with the MCU.
well, that's true. That is more or less what I'm saying. But I'm also thinking about like how Ant Man probably would work fine as like an animated movie and be like cheaper to do. And then you can just say like, and it's in continuity with like all the other Marvel movies or whatever. And then Ant Man can show up in the movies and he'll cost more, but he doesn't cost nearly as much as if you did his whole animated movie as a live action movie. Because that's how the CW did like Vixen. It's like it would probably be expensive to do all the crazy Vixen stuff in live action. So just make hers animated
Right.
and then
That gets to the thing that I always get is like, well, like that kind of stuff applies to like every movie. Like you could just make the whole thing animated to start with, and I'd like that better. Like maybe that's more like I'm not sure how much more expensive it would be to make something like an animated movie, even like a polished like animated movie, relative to like the budgets of like the big like Justice League MCU movies. So it's like hundreds of millions of dollars.
well that's like a Google search.
Because you can make like a quality, decent looking like um where you get like the Batman Beyond. It's like it's clearly just like the Batman Beyond people, but they have more of a budget to do like an actual movie, so it like looks better. in terms of like animation quality. But like you can just take all of that budget and make a really good animated movie that's not just like the direct to DVD stuff. Like, would that be
Easy is it
like
to get the budget information for the animated
right?
things? I'm like trying
I
to
feel like
find
none of
it.
them are at the scale of those other things. Like they're in like the smaller range of millions of dollars.
I'm trying to find what the
Usually.
budget was for Justice League Dark Apocalypse War or whatever.
Like it's like grossing like probably around, if not more than like two, like double digit millions. Like I don't think they do all that well.
Total
So
domestic video sales for Justice League Dark Apocalypse War was
yeah, like it's only like
$4,756,004.
single millions type stuff.
Right?
Where I guess because you can take something like that, even like double or triple the budget to make it like a really good movie or something, and like put it in theaters, and it'd still like be less than all of like this like complex like visual effects budgets that you have for like the CG on like the Avengers movie or something.
I wish I knew the budget for Justice League Dark Apocalypse War. Because all we know
It has to be less than
sales.
like most of those movies, if they're like consistently around like the few $1 million like gross sales, it's somewhere like around that. Like it's not going to be like a whole lot more because then they'd like have canceled it a while ago. So either they're like breaking even around that, like a few million in, few million out type stuff, or they're like subsidizing those for some reason on something else.
Well, the thing is, we won't
Another
know if they're subsidizing that. Like, if we don't know how much it was worth before.
right.
Yeah, so
I mean, like
hard to
logically, like
monitor.
either they're making money to be able to make that, like the movies are like bringing in enough revenue to sustain those, or they would have been canceled, or for some reason they're like diverting money from some other place that's actually making money to make these for some reason if they weren't making money themselves. Otherwise, they wouldn't get funded, I guess.
There's this
I mean, like the whole like series of those movies, not just like the one. Um,
understandable.
yeah, like the thing about like that is like you could like I feel like even if you had like a really good animated movie, it still wouldn't cost as much as like um the big budget
What was the
like
budget for
hundreds.
Spider-Verse?
That's true.
So it was 90 million USD. Okay, so how much did it make though? It made 375.5 million. That's not bad. Or is it bad? I actually don't know. Someone, let's see. Did it?
I don't think it flopped.
I don't think it.
Like even if you double the budget, that's still like half of what it grows, so it should still be fine.
So the thing that messed with me is that when I typed it in, it auto-filled like flop, and then I was like, ooh, I was like, did it? I was like, I don't know.
Yeah, it sounds like people are asking.
Um, so if it made 375, yeah, you're right, because if you double it, it'd be 180, and then you still would have plenty left. And I mean, it's getting a sequel, so this
Right.
is along the lines of what
Like
you were saying before, where
yeah, because Spider-Verse is like the higher end of the animated movie type stuff.
right.
And that's still like only 90 million or doubled to like 180 million, which is still like around, if not less than, a bunch of the other movies they're making.
Spider-Man: Homecoming was $175 million for its like budget, so it was almost double what they spent on
Right.
Spider.
It's like they're spending $100 million more dollars to make like live action movies that are like, I guess, can just be worse than like,
Well, you say
like
worse, but how much did Spider-Man Homecoming make? Right? Like, what was its like profit or whatever? Do, 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 do. I'm about to look that up now.
I just mean like imagine like I don't know something like yeah, because in talking about like these like AAA games or whatever in terms of like graphics equal or like money like budget equals like big graphic like what would like the Spider Verse be if they had like another $100 million to spend on it?
So, Ryan,
Yeah,
Spider-Man Homecoming made like 880
yeah.
million one
So
sixty-six
you're like these
thousand.
animated movies aren't like the kind of thing to make like $1 billion.
It just seems like the live action movies that have double the budget are making more money
Right.
than the animated films. But it gets weird to talk about because if you're like, well, if they put that kind of budget into the animated movies,
But they still want to get the return.
yeah, like would they get the return or
Yeah.
would it be like we dumped a whole bunch into the animated and then it only made what it made before? Like,
That is what happens when you have like animated flops, though. They're like, we dumped a whole lot of money into Mars Moms, and it was shit, you know?
right. So I
Because
I
budget doesn't equal quality.
right. So I don't know. Like I agree that the animated films are cheaper to produce, and it does seem like based on what we saw from just looking at Spider-Verse specifically
Or other movies.
that it made like a good profit, but it doesn't seem like the profit compares to what they can do with the live action. And if you're trying to make the most money, it sounds like you would
Is that
pick
in terms of like
live
the
action.
quality of the film, or is that just because it's like part of the MCU, though? Like it's got this like fandom following thing. Because Spider Verse like is not that. Like, it's singular.
Yeah, but Spider-Verse, where it's not a part of the MCU, it in itself starts its own Spider-Verse. Like now from
Yeah,
that one film, you could have like a Spider-Gwen
it's
spinoff or
the
like a
Iron
Miles
Man of the
spinoff or like
franchise.
a right. So it's weird to be like because it's not connected to a big franchise, it can't bring in big franchise money because it could just be the start of a big franchise and still bring in big
In the way that like Iron Man doesn't necessarily bring in big franchise money,
but it like
which
starts like a big franchise.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um
You can also have flops
yeah,
like that, like The Mummy.
yeah.
Um, Ryan,
Green
we fucked up because we jumped around topics so much.
Green Lantern show.
Um, are you excited about the Green Lantern show at all? Like,
No.
no. You're like I.
Like not really should I be? Like I don't like if I was excited about going and watching a Green Lantern show, I'd just go and actually like finish or like do a full rewatch or watch of like the Green Lantern animated series, like the CG one.
I kind of wish that show wasn't CG. Um, I don't think it looks bad necessarily, but it looks like
CG like holds it back in some regard.
to me it looks like the art style lends itself more to being 2D. Like I don't think they took advantage of it being
You don't think it
3D at all.
should have been 3D?
I
But 3D
I
where it's at, you know?
I just think it
Like
didn't have to be a
but where the Batman's in 3D.
Beware the Batman. I feel like there are just other things to worry about
Okay, sure.
than the
Like
visuals.
why are either of them in 3D though?
I would argue it's probably much easier to animate everything.
Yeah, sure. But I mean, like, is that it? Just like it's
Maybe,
cheaper to make?
yeah, that can be a
Yeah,
defining factor
sure.
of
Like,
anything.
um,
So that would be my guess. Yeah.
Do you think the Green Lantern show would have done better if it was in like a 2D, like in terms of like the art? Like, do you mean like it
I
wouldn't have
would have
animated?
personally liked it more. I don't know if the market would have liked it more. But when I look at it, I go, I think it just looked better flat. It doesn't really need because it to me it looks almost like it's like fake 3D. Like it looks faker than if it was just flat. Does that make sense? Like there's something about it that just
Yeah, a lot of CG cartoon stuff can just be like that.
um it might be like the plasticky like textures of everything. Where you look at it and it's not like trying to mimic like human skin. So
So would it be like better if it was some sort of like Spider Verse or like Paperman like comic or like drawing like aesthetic filter over it or something?
potentially, yeah. Like if you just like tweaked with the visuals, you probably could make it stand out a little bit more. Spider Verse, to me, it's a very different affair. Like the Green Lantern show, the models to me just look untextured. If you look at some images from Spider Verse, I remember looking at their
Yeah, yeah,
clothes
I'm
and being
thinking
like, the
about it.
clothes pop. It looks like
Yeah.
fabric. You know what I mean?
It's also like a movie budget, like it is that, $90 million or whatever versus whatever the budget was for this Green Lantern show. Where you're like, yeah, well, they probably just did the 3D to just save budget.
Right.
Like, so their budget was like even smaller than we probably think it was. I don't know. Yeah, like if I want to go watch a Green Lantern show, I just go watch that show, or maybe check out one of those like like Emerald Knight like movies or something I haven't actually ever seen before. Like there's just already Green Lantern stuff I probably would like that already exists
That you're already not watching.
that I'm already like aware of but haven't watched yet.
Right. Um, I will say, I'm at the very least excited for Alan Scott, Jessica Cruz, and Simon Baz.
To
Um,
do what?
I read like
Just be in the same room together?
no,
Like
not teaming.
hang out?
Excuse me, no, not them
What do you
hanging out.
think?
Like Alan Scott is a character that I recently became like more interested in, and who
Are you just excited to see them all on like the screen or something
I
more?
want to see new stories with them.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's more my
I mean, because like Jessica Cruz was at least in the that one animated
805
movie.
thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Like
like
I don't
the
know if Alan Scott or Simon Baz have been in anything even like that.
I would say Jessica Cruz
Yeah.
is more famously known for being in DC superhero girls than she is for being in the Fatal Five thing. Because she's just like a main
Probably.
character in
That's
superhero
true.
movies.
But I mean like so that's like two things she has. She's been in like two shows or movies. Simon Baz and now I've been in like zero.
So Simon Baz and Jessica Cruz are weird characters. I did have a weird reaction to them being the like main Green Lanterns in the show. And it's because Simon Baz is a character who they've kind of done almost nothing with after a certain point. He and Jessica Cruz were members of the Justice League, and in the run of Justice League that they're in, the last arc is like, our children from the future come back, and Jessica Cruz and Flash fuck, and they have kids. And Simon Bass is like, where are my kids? Crickets. And am I in the future? Crickets. Like it's who knows? And then Simon
He got killed off screen in the future.
maybe because the
Or even in the slight future. Like is it soon Simon Baz will just be dead.
because the last time I remember
Like all the kids come back and they're like, "Oh yeah, we have no idea who you are.
fair. The
Like
last
you don't make it. You don't make the cut."
he appears like in cameos now, like where he's not like a major player. He's just like
Yeah, it kind of sounds like he had his whole like run and like character development thing, like the gun and stuff. But like once you finished his like first like main story like that, does he even have anything else to do?
Right. And
It sounds like he
the
doesn't.
answer is no. Yeah.
Yeah.
In case you guys don't know about the gun thing, Simon Baz didn't trust his Green Lantern ring because the first time he tried to use it, it didn't work.
So like,
So
do you
he
think
keeps a
like
gun with him all the time.
do you
And then
think
later Batman
the
talked him out
like
of
the
it.
show will like be like retreading that like kind of character arc, or do you think they'll like just be like post that Simon Baz,
So, you know what's weird about all these
like
characters?
modern Simon Baz or like introduction Simon Baz?
What's weird about all these characters is that if you do try to tell their origins, you better change some shit. You kind of have to. For Jessica Cruz, her origins are directly tied to Forever Evil, which is where the crime syndicate from Earth 3 invade Earth 0,
Yeah, yeah, I guess it's a
and then
complicated lore work.
Jessica
But I mean, like,
Cruz gets the ring of Power Ring, who's like the evil Green Lantern from Earth 3.
I get what you mean,
And by
right?
overcoming that ring,
Stop saying lore. I
well,
don't.
hold on, I'm saying like it's
What?
really important. Like it because the whole reason she becomes a Green Lantern is because she overcomes this evil power ring from like an alternate
Okay,
universe.
so like if they change shit, to what degree would they have to change shit that they could like introduce their origins? Like, okay, if they don't introduce their weird lore dense origin story, then what would they do instead?
Right. Like
Like for the show?
because it's either a thing.
Like if you don't have Jessica Cruz coming off the syndicate thing from Earth 3, where do you bring Jessica Cruz in from?
Right.
Earth 1, Earth 0?
Because you either do all that, which would be actually kind of like they would surprise the shit out of me if the Green
Would they
Lantern
even be able to
were
do all
doing
that like
Forever
out of
Evil.
context without like establishing all that shit? Like that Earth 3 is like a thing or something? Like just like start like the first scene is like, they have like the location title like Earth 3 and then just like starts off with shit. Like
I mean,
people would get like confused. They'd be like, "What the fuck is an Earth 3?"
I
Like,
mean, this connects to what we were talking about yesterday, where I'm like, I think audiences are a lot smarter than we give them credit for. And
I'm not saying that that's.
give them
I'm
too
like,
much context.
to what degree would you want to create the show like with an expectation that like they know who Jessica Cruz or Simon Bass like are,
I mean,
or like are familiar like with their plot arcs or something like in the comics, or do you
I
just like do like a fresh like someone who's never read any of that? Kind of like those movie only watcher type people who've just never seen it because they haven't been in like shows or movies like Simon Baz like at all. So like
right
they don't know anything about this guy.
for all of the characters except like Kilowog and Sinestro for the show.
They were in an earlier.
Well, they're in like the show too, like the Green Lantern animated series, and they're in the other animated movie. Like people
I mean, like to what extent?
kind of know who they
Like
are.
does any like depending on like the kind of like generalized like viewer that we're thinking of.
Mhm.
Like, would they even know who like Kilowog is? I'm like, what if someone who's only seen like the Ryan Reynolds movie? Well, maybe they know who like Sinestro and like something like that. They
Mhm.
might remember cause that's also like a what 13-year-old movie or something. Like
Well,
how
those
old is
are
that movie?
characters that you don't need to know too much about to kind of get. Kilowog is like, I may seem kind of rough and tough on the outside, but I really care about my team, and I'm just trying to train you guys to be the best you can be. Tragic backstory, whatever, doesn't matter too much. Just know that I'm like tough but soft at the same
Right,
time.
right. Okay.
That's all you need. And then
Sure, but
Sinestro,
you
all
don't
you
need to
really
know much
need,
about.
right? And then
Well, would they do that
Sinestro,
same thing for the other guys, like Simon Bass?
they lose a lot if you try to water them down. Because Jessica Cruz is like I watched my friends get murdered and I almost
Right.
got killed myself, and then I had to like board myself up in my room because I couldn't stand to go into the outside world due to my anxieties. And all this Earth 3 shit happens, and I get forced out of my comfort zone, and then I have to overcome this like impossible challenge to become a Green Lantern.
There's a bunch of complicated origins.
And then Simon
You
Baz.
can't just put it on like a one-page summary the way you can like Superman or something, you know?
I disagree. Like you
What?
probably could cut up like Jessica Cruz stuff pretty well. You could say like I was overcome by anxiety. I couldn't leave my house due to circumstances like outside of my control. I get rushed into like this new world and I have to like under
That already sounds
the
like too
process
much
everything.
words.
You I, you just got to imagine it. Like first panel, Jessica Cruz like
Yeah, I get that, but like,
uh thing.
because you were going in like on the whole like Earth 3 lore stuff. I'm like, but could you actually just like cut that out?
You can
And what would you
just
have left?
you can just show a little bit kind of thing because you were talking about Superman's origin, where Grant Morrison famously in All Star Superman does it in like 4 panels or whatever.
Yeah.
But that's because he's like, you get it. He's like, you already know. With
Yeah,
Jessica Cruz, you have to tell at least a little bit more.
right. So I'm like,
I bet you
so to
couldn't do
what
it in a
degree
page. I think you could
should
do it in a
like the
page.
writers like should they assume that you don't know anything that to tell like just more or less the whole origin, like to have like the whole like Batman parent death scene equivalent, like
They,
in the first like act of the movie or show or something?
they probably should do it only because this is a situation where I'm like,
Like new
there
characters,
is no real previous context.
they're not in the zeitgeist the way that Batman and Superman are.
Right. Or even just like Spider-Man and a lot of the other characters.
Yeah,
So I think if they didn't tell origins for these characters, then they should make the origins not important.
because the thing with the origins is you can either have an origin and like make a big deal about how, or you can just have them just already be there anyway.
You can just
Like
have them
status
already
quo,
be
like
there anyway.
post origin. I'm just here in the way that like MCU Spider-Man is like I'm just here.
Right. I think I because
Like
one thing
that's easier for like these more well-known like zeitgeist
characters.
characters.
Right.
But you can't just not do that.
I agree with that because I personally don't like that most superhero stuff is an origin story, but I feel like in this case in particular, I kind of want people to know about the backgrounds of these characters because people just don't. Like, I don't know. Like,
Like you would rather that this be like their introduction to the character, and you want to make it like as good as possible or something.
right. Because I would say if they were to, like, let's say they rebooted Thor and they were like, we're going to do like a whole new actor, different continuity, different universe, new Thor thing. I'm like, you probably don't have to show me like the beginning of Thor. People are familiar enough with Thor. You could kind of
Right. It's like one of those like animated ones where it's just like Thor versus the Hulk. You can just have them fight. And, like, Thor's like, yo, Banner, what's up? We know each other. We're like established in the Avengers
right.
off screen in this version, like you just insinuate that kind of stuff.
It's the fact that in this particular case, there just isn't enough of a foundation for them to do that without
Right.
people getting, I would argue, like pissy about it. I've heard people say Justice League isn't a good movie because they don't go deep into everyone's origin, which I disagree with. But I've heard people say the characters have no value if I don't know where they come from, kind of thing. And I think that's interesting. Again, I disagree with that because they still can exist in the story. Like it would be better to argue that the story doesn't do anything with them than to say it's because I didn't see their origin because those are just two
I
different.
mean, I always get that like if the origin is like different or something. Like if we're gonna establish that like yeah, the Flash is like different from like Wally West Flash or some, like some like kind of like stock like Silver Age version. Like if we're gonna make some kind of change to like his characterization, you might want to like have his origin story again.
I don't think you need the origin story to show how the characters are different. Spider-Man being a good example, you know? Like with Tom Holland, you can already see that he's not the same kind of Spider-Man as Andrew Garfield or Tobey Maguire. Where Tobey Maguire is a big fucking nerd, and Andrew Garfield is like, I'm like a cool nerd though. I like skateboard or whatever. To Tom Holland to me is just kind of a normal kid, I would say. I don't think he too
Abs.
hard into like
Spider
any of the
abs.
stuff.
He's
Spider
got those
abs.
Tobey Maguire post like puberty scene spider abs.
Oh, spider abs. I thought you said ass. I thought you said
Nah.
spider
I
abs.
mean, probably that too. Well, Captain America has ass.
America's ass.
Established in the movie.
Mhm.
I don't know about anyone else. Maybe Black Widow, I guess.
I don't think anyone said anything about her butt
I know, but like the
continuity
way
though.
that like I'm not sure, like in like Iron Man 2 or something. There's a lot of like male gaze in that movie.
It's been a long time since I've watched Iron Man 2. The main thing I
He like
remember from
trips in
the
a
movie is
car.
the War Machine team up near the end and the briefcase suit. And those are like the two things that stand out.
I mean, it's very interesting, that movie. There's like a whole high top like 50-minute episode about it.
I haven't watched High Top in a hot minute. He's not a bad channel.
It's like Iron Man 2 is like this really transitional thing. It's like before it falls in line with a bunch of like the samey like color grading complaints everyone has about the Marvel movies. But also like it still has like this kind of like, stuff, like in terms of the effects, like the Iron Man suit's not like shitty yet, but the movie itself isn't all that great. But like it still has like interesting stuff going on.
Oh, Ryan, I gotta go. I gotta go because I'm gonna try and wake up at like a normal time tomorrow. Well, I guess today.
Me
If I can
too.
help it. Um, so real quick before I end it, I want to say yesterday on the podcast, I mentioned that I was going to be working on a comic about this guy named Bob. I haven't finished writing the script for that. I've written out what all the captions would be, but I haven't described what all the art will be, nor have I started drawing it. I've decided that I'm going to call that comic Bobby Odor, which is a play on the words body odor. But I actually wrote an entire script for a Minecraft comic, and I've almost drawn half of it. I just fell deep into like a different project. So the Minecraft comic will probably be like the next thing that's out. And then I may go back to Bobby Odor later. But I just wanted to give a quick announcement on that. Also, check out my books, Rift and Tone, issue 1 on Amazon, and Blade of Sparks, Medieval Fantasy Comic Adventure, also on Amazon. Both are $1 8-page comics. So yeah, I just wanted to do a few plugs. Oh, the call fill. No, no. I hadn't asked Ryan what his recommendation was yet. Because I always like to hear him like plug something for you guys to check out as well. Little, 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 little. Will Ryan return? Find out tonight on Two Guys Talking. Unreachable. Oh, his phone died. That's what I would guess happened. Well, thank you guys for watching. If you guys like this video, make sure to smash that like button, favorite, comment, subscribe, and ding, 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 ring the notification bell to be notified whenever we do these videos. Thank you all once again for tuning in. This is your host, your friend, your boy, Jet Black, the one and only, here with Ryan, who's currently unreachable, logging out. Peace. Chicken